Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. I'm joined today by Dan Caesar and we're going to discuss a few salient topics that are washing around the internet and the real world. There we go. Now I just wanted to give you an example of a professional introduction.
That's fantastic. I feel the pressure's off me now to be equally professional. Well, last time we spoke, I was very downbeat, I think, and a bit downcast. I think it was just we'd had about 700 days of consecutive rainfall.
Yes,
I think.
And the whole winter.
The UK was in recession, but now the sun's out, the recession is gone, all is well with the world, and we are gearing up for our next show, which is Everything Electric North in Harrogate. And we've been very busy on the Fully Charged show, very busy with stop burning stuff as well. Yeah. So it's high time to have a bit of a catch up.
That's very good. And I think one of the things I can't help saying is that it looks like the weather's going to be okay at Harrogate, because it's indoors and outdoors, and all our shows are indoors and outdoors. But Harrogate somehow, because it's so beautiful, the location, you kind of want to be outside quite a lot. And I'm just worried if we're going to have lousy weather, it would be more challenging. But Yorkshire's always gorgeous. I've been saying this all year.
The Yorkshire Event Centre is amazing. So it's kind of perched on that kind of hill just outside Harrogate. I think it's our kind of aesthetically most pleasing venue. It's an amazing festival experience there. We can't wait to go back. It's amazing that it's a year ago.
I know.
Amazing in that it feels like it was about 7 years ago, but at the same time, it feels like it was just yesterday. And we're really looking forward to going back. We've got a great show planned. It opens on Friday the 24th, runs through to Sunday the 26th. And the shows have become real kind of fun festivals, I think, for the family now. Yeah. We can't wait to do it. And it gives us a great deal of energy to catch up with people who quite like the Fully Charged show.
Yeah, which is very nice. The panels are fantastic. We know that the test drive's there. The test drive list is bonkers. And then the latest edition, did that happen yesterday or the day before? Do you not know about this?
Well, I don't.
You might not. Mini.
Yes, so there's quite a few cars coming.
I think it's worth mentioning.
Pretty big test drive feature. I'm feeling very midlife crisis, and I might like to try the Hyundai Ioniq 5N. I might like to give that a bit of a spin. I think that's the first time it's been available for test drive. But there's tons of different cars coming, different electric vehicles of all shapes and sizes, and then loads and loads of home energy stuff too. So it's going to be a really, really good show. Yeah. And yet it looks like the weather's going to be okay, which is a bonus. But these shows have come to sort of punctuate our year. Yeah. And then we'll get through that one. We start planning for second trip to Canada.
Yes.
And then we have Farnborough returns in the autumn. We're now working on the schedule for 2025 and 2026.
And 2026.
And we're trying to get up to 10 live exhibitions by 2030.
Wow.
10 a year.
Yes.
So that's going to take some planning and some doing. But obviously the reason we're doing that is not because we love the live shows. We do, but because they're such important moments to convert people into these technologies.
I think that's an important point to make if you've never been to one of the shows, is that they're not like a traditional car show, and they're not like a traditional sort of home show, if you like a ideal home show or grand design. They're a combination of the two, but they've become a different they've almost become a hybrid. Not that I want to use that word, but it's the atmosphere, and this is really the feedback we get from people who have attended them, rather than us saying is that there is a real strong kind of community event feel to them, and there's such positivity, and there's so many people you can talk to there that aren't trying to sell you one specific thing. I think that's it. The home energy show is such a critically important thing that you can go and find, how on earth do I put a battery or solar panels on my house, or a different water heater, or a different central heating system, or heat pumps, and you can talk to someone who's not trying to flog you a specific heat pump, which I think is a particular product.
Well, I think it's fair to say we know quite a lot about electric cars, and we know quite a lot about home energy. But if I go to an event where I don't know a lot, I'm sometimes scared to ask questions. Yeah. And if people are coming and they're interested in these things and they don't know the answers, this is the least judgmental, most friendly, most positive environment you can get. So it's really, really good. You've got things like, as you say, the energy advice zone, the test drives. Your fears and anxieties about driving electric kind of melt away after you've had a couple of test drives and you realize how good the cars are. So from our perspective, the ability to get people to talk about these technologies, test them. It's been absolutely an amazing success story for us. And we are interested fundamentally in getting people to stop burning stuff. So it's really been powerful. So lots of events to come. And at the moment, we're just trying to work out where we go next year as well.
Right.
We have done 2 years in Sydney now, and we will be going back to Sydney in March. But actually, there are a couple of other cities in Australia that are really trying to get us to go down under as well.
It's amazing, isn't it?
We are strongly considering it.
Yes. They're great. It's definitely to our advantage that there's a sort of sporting, competitive, feeling between Australian cities. Wait a minute, they've got everything electric. We want it.
There's definitely been
my Australian accent. Do forgive me if you're Australian.
There's definitely been some competition, and I think what's really interesting and probably kept me sane is the UK market has been tough. I'm going to be very upbeat today. I'm feeling that things are starting to get a little bit better, but the reality is the Australian market is flying.
Yeah.
Canadian market is flying. So it is a little bit, politics unfortunately is wrapped up in why the UK economy is obviously struggling, and the clean tech economy, as we would call it, is also having a little bit of a hard time. But ultimately, these technologies are here to stay, and they're only going to get bigger and bigger.
And I think the other thing that's important to talk about is the North. Although I've had all these messages recently, I can't wait to travel south to go to everything electric north. So it's people in Scotland and further north. So they think of Harrogate as the Midlands for them, which it kind of geographically is, but it is certainly the northern bit of England anyway. But I mean there's no question of what's happened in the UK in the last really 20 years, to be fair, is this sort of all the money's fallen down to sort of the southeast of this island, and the north has definitely not had a good time.
Well, there's lots of talk about levelling up and the Northern Powerhouse and things like that, and I would contend that those have been kind of empty rhetoric until now, really. I think there's kind of a genuine intention, but the danger is you end up in very much a two-tier society. Yeah. And the whole point about these technologies is it should be available to everyone. If you look at a map of where the most solar installs, for example, are, well, where do you think it is? It's the south of England, particularly sort of south-central, southwest, and to the sort of north of London as well. Those are the areas where you see the most sort of solar capacity on people's rooftops, and very, very little up in the north. And that obviously speaks to income as well. It speaks to disposable income. So the reality is that we always felt it was really, really important to do a show in the north of England. And from our perspective, we'd love to do one in Scotland as well, but you've got to make these things work economically. We also know where our audience is, so we've often been asked, will we do one in Birmingham? And we don't have a huge audience in the West Midlands, for example. So we've kind of mapped out our 3 shows in the UK as being in Hampshire, which is obviously the home counties, in East London, and one on the kind of the northern sort of spine of the country to attract people from across the north, and hopefully a few people down from Scotland as well. So that's worked out quite well for us, and I think it gives us a great opportunity today to talk about the opportunities that exist for the north, which I think this whole move, this whole energy transition could be really beneficial to the north of England. And one of the things we also often talk about in energy circles is the 3 Ds of energy. So obviously decarbonisation is a given. And obviously that's really, really important to people like me who, have really been, campaigning for technologies that tackle climate for many years, that tackle clean air. But actually the other 2 Ds are interesting, which is digitalisation. So we're seeing now technology become much, much smarter. But the 3rd D, which I think is the most interesting of all, is decentralisation.
Right.
So as you know, I'm basically an old communist. So I actually believe that maybe there is an inequity in the societies that we live in. And the reality is that what we've had is a centralised energy system, which revolves around central ownership, revolves around power plants and things like that. And actually this digitisation, this breaking up of the energy industry can mean that actually it can be decentralised, and it means new opportunities for places like the north of England to kind of reinvent itself. And it means you can have lots of different, you can start again almost with the energy system.
Yeah.
And take advantage of that. So I'm kind of really interested in how the North can benefit from that. And I thought it would be quite useful to run through a few things. I'm not going to do a full manifesto.
No, that's good though.
We're not quite in election season yet.
But some bullet points.
Some bullet points. Yeah, some bullet points, really. I think from our perspective, what we've heard a lot of so far, we are going to have an election in the UK at some point, unless there's a coup. That would be exciting.
If there's a military coup, it would be very interesting. We'll do an episode about it.
But the reality is that so far, what we're waiting for the manifestos from the different parties.
Yeah.
We have heard quite a lot of talk in the Labour Party about hydrogen and CCS.
Right.
And in fact, I was at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool a few months ago, and the exhibition they had alongside the conference was full of CCS companies and full of hydrogen companies.
Wow.
More than anything else, actually.
Right.
So those companies are lobbying very, very hard.
Yeah.
The Labour Party will be, I'm sure, in the final points of drawing up its manifesto ahead of the next election. They've talked about creating a great British energy company. But what we would say, actually, the future really is all about solar, wind, batteries, electric cars. And actually, yes, hydrogen has a role to play. And I'm sure carbon capture does, even if we don't believe it's actually got a huge role to play. But
there's certain industries where it's kind of critically important to make it work and do it,
And there are obviously parts of the North which will, has industrialization, refineries, all sorts of things. So they'll be keen to understand how that works. But we think electrification is the kind of the main game. So we're quite interested to see what the Labour manifesto says.
Yeah.
We're also quite interested to see what the Conservative manifesto says and the others. But it does seem at the time of speaking that the Labour Party is probably in the box seat as far as the next election is concerned.
Yeah.
But I went to Grimsby last week, and I caught up with our friends at My Energy.
Amazing company.
And it was fantastic, actually. I'm sure we'll cover that in some capacity, but it was good to see them. They've expanded their
factory is finished now because it was a building site.
Factory is up and running.
Right.
I love a factory tour.
Oh, you can't beat
I know
a factory
you do.
tour. Oh.
Pretty sure Imogen would love a factory tour. We had the full tour, the full walk around, and it was incredibly impressive.
Wow.
State of the art, I would say. But what was interesting to me was as I drove up towards their headquarters at Imminent, on the horizon there is the port of Imminent, which I think is by tonnage is the biggest port in the UK.
Right. Wow.
And there are all the stacks of the refinery there alongside it.
Right.
So you've got this kind of juxtaposition of new industry with My Energy and old industry alongside it. So I think from a perspective of hydrogen and CCS, clearly I think it is going to be an important part of any manifesto. But I think proportionately the real opportunities lie in the things that are particularly dear to us, which are batteries and wind and solar in particular.
I mean, there was a particular report that literally came out yesterday, which the latest figures are that batteries have just overtaken pumped storage, which I would have thought wouldn't happen sort of ever, or certainly not for a long time, because the amount of pumped storage in the world is massive. If you think of all the facilities in Norway in particular, they've got loads. We've got a bit here, but a lot of countries have it. Switzerland has a huge amount. China is using a lot. There's quite big in the United States and in Australia, but now that is smaller than our installed battery. We're talking grid batteries, really kind of industrial level grid batteries have overtaken pump storage. I really didn't think that would ever happen. And it's multiple terawatt hours of battery storage are available around the world now to make grids, to help with grid management.
Yeah, and we haven't seen anything yet.
No,
that's the reality, and that's where that digitization, that breaking down of energy means you can have lots of little units in battery form that can actually over time, every little counts to coin a supermarket phrase, that actually can make a huge difference in the aggregate, whether it's home batteries or building batteries or the larger battery energy storage systems. I mean, one of the things that really interests me is geography and how that impacts energy. So different countries have different wealths. China's been very, very clever at how it's kind of constructed an economy, and it's gathered together the materials, refining, etc. But some countries are in really strong positions and others are weaker. Australia's in quite a strong position, for example.
Very strong,
But the UK is almost the perfect place for wind power.
Yes.
I mean, the resource we have in that respect is fantastic. And clearly we have tapped into it. If you look at the energy, the grid mix from 2012 to now, it's been utterly transformed. Wind power is a massive, massive part of our kind of energy mix, and coal has been kind of moved off the system. But still, there's a huge amount of potential. And what fascinates me at the moment is if you look at the north of England, actually that kind of that narrow neck of England, where if you take sort of North Wales up to the kind of the lakes and also the North Sea side, there's actually a relatively narrow part of the country with a high concentration of people living in Liverpool and Manchester, Leeds, across to Newcastle, Middlesbrough, Sunderland, etc. To actually reinvigorate the economies in those areas, that wind power is in a huge, huge opportunity. So the ability to create loads of wind power offshore, whether it's normal wind turbines or if it's floating, which there's a lot of that, and those projects were being built at the moment, and onshore, which I think should come back onto the agenda. Yeah, I think the opportunity for the north of England to be a powerhouse is actually huge. And what we also see in the UK is lots of coastal towns are fairly neglected. Yeah, it can be a bit depressing, but there are now there's a huge wind array called Rampion, I think it is, just off Brighton.
Right.
I don't know if you've seen
that. Yes, you can just see about it on the horizon.
From Brighton. But I think all of these, coastal towns could be, revivified by having kind of, wind arrays off them. So there are some already built in the North Sea. I think Morecambe has got one that's coming. We know
Liverpool Bay is huge.
Liverpool Bay. There is obviously on the North Sea, the Dogger Bank, larger Dogger Bank project as well. And so I've been talking to the Crown Estate, who manage the seabeds, just to find out what is in existence already and what is being permitted and what is being consented. And so there's huge opportunity there. If you get all that wind power, all that renewable energy, well, pouring it straight into batteries or battery manufacture or car manufacture or renewable hydrogen or whatever it may be, there's a huge opportunity. So I think what we're going to try and do is actually try and get maybe the Crown Estate on one of the podcasts as well to talk about future opportunities. So I think there's a really big opportunity for the north of England there as well. And then of course there's domestic properties. Yeah.
Which there's a lot.
There is. There
Tell me more about domestic properties, Dan.
Well, I think the reality is that you've got this huge opportunity to almost create more, energy security, energy resilience, baseload, whatever term you want to go with, in the aggregate across all the different homes of the north of England. Yeah. As I said, the solar uptake has been relatively low so far, and I think a lot of that's probably about disposable incomes in the north of England. But the reality is that the more homes that have solar, the more homes that have the batteries, potentially in the future the battery in the car as a bi-directional device as well. I think the opportunity for the north is very significant. Also for skilling up as well. Yeah. We are going to, over time, believe it or not, we're going to take boilers out and we're going to electrify a lot of heat. That's a huge, we've spoken about this before, that's a huge opportunity for anyone who's looking for a job for life, of which there are very, very few now. Yes. AI will be taking your job any day now. So, the reality is, but putting a heat pump in or, doing that sort of thing, those are big jobs. So there is actually a huge economic opportunity in North of England.
Well, also, just very briefly, the energy estuary, which I always think is great, which is Hull, which was this thriving fishing port 100 years ago, 50 years ago, really went down on its luck and is now this kind of booming high-tech area where all the biggest blades for the biggest wind turbines are all made there. Even for like Norway, Denmark, Sweden, if they're putting in wind turbines, they make the blades in Hull or in Humberside generally, which is extraordinary.
That part of the world has really benefited from the kind of the wind power revolution. But also you've got to think what we're going to lose, because if we have less and less, petroleum, I think oil and gas transportation is about 40% of global shipping. Something
to
like
move
that.
Oil is about 40% of ships.
As that slowly diminishes, that will affect jobs, that will affect work, and you've got to have a cogent plan to replace that with something else, whether it's wind power or batteries. But the reality is actually the north of England, actually from a geographic perspective, is actually kind of well positioned. But it's going to take, some inspirational leadership to make sure that the Northern Powerhouse isn't just a throwaway phrase and it actually becomes a real thing.
It does feel a bit like it has been that. I'm just having a quick look at the figures, Dan, because it's 49 terawatt hours of electricity was just from offshore wind in 2023, last year, which we've worked out is about 18% of the total consumption of the UK, which is, that's gone from 0% in really my very recent, the very recent past. It would have been minute. It would have been immeasurably small 20 years ago to 18%. I mean, it's a huge amount. That's a vast amount of electricity. It's been, and none of that electricity needed any fuel or any imports or any money leaving our economy. This is the kind of, I think, rather a critical point.
Well, it is really, really important. I mean, I think there is a balance to be struck. I was at a dinner last night with some MPs who were all very pro clean energy in general.
And I think it's because that was interestingly across the political spectrum.
Yeah, that was all party, and it was interesting. But one of the subjects that came up quite frequently was NIMBYism, i.e. not in my backyard.
Yeah.
And if you are a politician, I think politics is fear these days. You're really scared of upsetting people.
Yeah,
it can be quite difficult to say, actually, this is the way we're going to do it, and to stick to that mandate when you've got some very sort of vocal people who are in opposition, and also potentially some constituents who are just scared of change.
Yeah.
So I have some sympathy for politicians. I think it's an incredibly difficult job. Of course it is. But the reality is that you've got to read the bigger picture. The bigger picture is we're heading to a world where an energy transition takes place, and we want to be inside that, in my opinion, not outside, regretfully kind of
looking in and crying.
Looking on, going, we've missed a huge opportunity to reinvent ourselves. For example, having Chinese and Korean car companies and Tesla set up shop and make cars here and build batteries here would be a huge opportunity in my book. So having spoken to some politicians as recently as last night, it was kind of interesting to get their take. And the north of England, I think, is sort of ripe for rejuvenation.
Yeah. I mean, they are doing stuff, aren't they? Because I know they're building a new battery plant with Nissan at Sunderland, and there's talk of doing one just down the road here in Somerset. Those things are, they're starting to emerge and starting to look slightly more plausible, because we've seen, in the last 10 years, so many, big projects that were going to start, and then they falter and they fall over, and it's really, it's tough to do it.
Well, British Volt, of course, was one of the big ones.
Yeah.
And of course, that is, I think, currently under review, to be generous.
Definitely having a nap.
And I think the cables from the Viking Link came up in Blythe, I think, which is in
Northumberland. Yeah, it is,
So, there are opportunities. I personally think onshore wind should be a much bigger thing. The Scottish government have embraced it. If you drive up, either M6 or A1 route up to Scotland, you'll see lots of onshore wind turbines. They export electricity to the rest of the UK. I mean, they do, and I think north of England has got great opportunity. I understand why there is NIMBYism and there is concern about those things, but I don't know. My granddad was a pylon engineer, and when I was a kid, he took me to see a pylon being kind of put in the ground, and they just, after a while, they become,
you just don't see them,
part of the background furniture. I mentioned about the refinery I drove past the other day. It's no one's idea of attractive. There are plenty of power plants out there as well. I actually think wind turbines, by comparison, are quite,
they're delicate.
I would call them stunning sometimes, but maybe that's just me. The reality is they're kind of interesting. But I think the point you mentioned, the resilience, energy security thing, I think that's quite big for big motivation for a lot of people. We have in the UK what some people call, this may get edited out, flag shaggers, people who are too interested in saying, everything's got to be British. But the reality is that why shouldn't we be creating British energy?
Yes.
Solar. Our own solar or our own wind. There was a big thing around Brexit about British fish. I don't know if you remember that. Which is a rather odd phrase, but the reality is, I think there is a huge opportunity for us to create and store our own energy, and I think that any politician worth their salt has really got to be thinking about how can we, be part of this new industrial revolution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's become a cliche. I've said it so many times, but $1 billion. Let's just go a little bit over $1 billion a week leaves our economy to pay for fossil fuels. Now, obviously, there's enormous benefits from that ability to burn all those fossil fuels, but it's still leaving our economy. And if you reduce that by half, I think we'd see major changes in the way our economy works. That's $52 billion a year is going elsewhere. And obviously we can't deliver carrots to the supermarket without it at the moment, but maybe we can fairly soon. And that's what we're seeing is that shift, in the energy use is also a massive shift in the economy, which I think I haven't really got my head around that yet. And I don't know if anyone has. I'm sure people have talked about it.
Well, I think the UK is interesting in that we obviously sit just to the side of Europe.
Yeah.
But we actually take the lead a lot from that country on the other side of the water.
That's true.
Which is the USA. I think that's been our kind of default position. Yeah. You could argue how healthy that's been for us, that partnership over many years.
Yeah.
But the reality is that we tend to follow America's lead.
Yeah.
And they're very much about their own energy independence and generating their own power, some protectionism, which maybe we'll talk about in a minute. And I do think that, in the UK, we have the ability not to just follow, but we do have the opportunity to generate our own power. But the difference, obviously, with America and the UK is that we have let a lot of our manufacturing go.
Yeah. Or, in fact, actively encouraged it to go.
Offshored it.
Yeah.
A lot of it's gone to China and to elsewhere.
Asian countries.
So we're in a very, very different situation. We have a lot to win, which I think America's being quite protectionistic at the moment because it has a lot to lose.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of fascinated by that. And I'm hoping that the presidential election to come and the UK election don't kind of contaminate each other too much. Yeah. Because at the time of us talking, Joe Biden's just announced he's going to quadruple the tariffs on Chinese cars.
Chinese cars, amazing.
In America.
Yeah, which is pretty chunky. That's not a delicate adjustment.
I think it's the reality is that he's trying to get ahead of an electoral issue.
Yeah.
He's trying to demonstrate to Americans that actually he is on the side of America. Yeah. Before Trump does the same thing. So he's just trying to get ahead. But I think that policy in America, I still think it's probably a mistake in the long term. I understand it because they've got a car manufacturing
they've got a really
industry.
Big car industry, yeah.
So I do understand it. In the UK, I think it would be absolutely the wrong move for us to do that. But you never know in an election cycle. Maybe some people think that's a good thing to imitate.
I mean, that's the thing is that it's important to remember that there's so many companies that are not American based that have huge factories in the United States. So Toyota, Honda, Nissan. I mean, they all do. Basically, all the Asian car makers have all got factories that employ Americans like we do in here. I mean, our only car factories really in this country are, it used to be Nissan and Honda, but Honda closed. So we've got Nissan. Who else have we got in this country?
Tata, also known as JLR.
JLR. Yes,
Ford is still making some here. Stellantis is a multinational. They're still making stuff here in Ellesmere Port and I think in Luton as well. Yeah. Toyota in Burnaston. I think Mini in Oxford. But you're right. It's not what it once was.
No.
And the US is really interesting in that respect. So at the moment with the new tariffs, effectively, that is preventing BYD from going into the US as it stands, unless they commit to making the cars and the batteries in the US. They've tried to forestall BYD going into Mexico, I think, because I think under the NAFTA regulations, they can actually make stuff in Mexico and have some of the rules apply. But I think the new tariff would take care of that.
Okay.
And that's my understanding. Yeah. But then you do have some brands like Polestar, obviously.
Yeah.
Swedish cool cars as they are, but obviously they
made in China.
Geely is behind them, and so they're now working out how they have to do things differently. For example,
I mean, I wonder if one of the side impacts of that, of the US effectively stopping Chinese car sales in the United States is that the Chinese companies will then refocus. I mean, it feels like it's already happened. Refocus their attention on Europe. So the European market, I feel, is where they're going to be. And we know BYD are opening like hundreds of showrooms right across Europe.
Well, it's certainly changed the order in which they're doing things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think BYD are so big, I don't think it will delay them for that long, but it will detain them for a little bit. I'm sure they're watching the presidential election with great interest as well. We know we were speaking to BYD about coming and do our California show a couple of years ago, and they were very keen until things changed, and they were much less keen to do that. So we know that's the case. There was a great bit of reportage from Ed Conway, who I think you've had on the podcast before, on Sky the other day, who was talking about Chinese car exports. Right. And there's an amazing graph which showed how they've come from nowhere to be the biggest exporter now globally, which is really, really fascinating. But the reality is, at the moment, a lot of that's still the very big Chinese domestic market, and then a lot of it's coming into Europe. The UK actually is, I think, the biggest by volume outside of China, I think, because we have MG and we have Polestar, and also we have BYD are here now, etc. So it really is interesting to see that change. But in America, ultimately, it is going to hit the normal person who wants a cleaner, greener car, because they're going to be unaffordable for quite some time to come.
It's an increasingly common comment I see on our YouTube episodes that feature, so maybe something Elliot's seen in China or something we've seen here, is I wish we could get these in my country. And I always think, God, I'm surprised somehow. That's counter to what I would have expected. But, there's often negative stuff where all Chinese cars catch fire, and you go, yeah, whatever. But then there's a lot of people saying, why can't we get smaller, cheaper cars in America? Which is, that's a growing background beat.
Well, I mean, if you're in the Pacific Northwest, you can come to Everything Electric Canada. In September, you can come across the border and you can see what you could have won if you lived in Vancouver. But
I think I'm intrigued by that as an individual. If someone bought a BYD Atto 3 in Canada, could they drive it? Can they drive it into America?
I would assume so, and I'm sure someone in the comments will
explain. Yeah.
But no, I mean the reality is that in the UK, and I'm sure other countries across Europe would agree with this, we do need more affordable EVs. We're seeing them come now. In fact, we're filming with quite a few.
Yeah.
A day after this podcast lands, I think, or maybe a few days after this podcast lands, we actually have the Kia EV3, which we filmed recently. And we've recently filmed with Dacia Spring, and there are a number of different more affordable cars coming, and that wouldn't have happened without Tesla, and then without China kind of inspiring
that's what's pushed it.
Suddenly, companies are realizing they have to compete and quickly.
Yeah. So stop burning stuff. Very interesting stuff that's been happening recently, and I will mention it because I mentioned it on a news report. It's how many BBC radio shows I've been invited to go on. I haven't gone on many because I've often in the briefing call I may have said, I've not been rude, Dan. I've been really polite and respectful, but I've allowed my opinion to get ahead of me, and so they just go with someone who's less contentious, I think. But that's mainly about the drop in sales of, everyone hates EVs, but the stop burning stuff is countering. We've got to say about our victory with the Daily Mail. That was amazing.
Yeah, that was a good story. I'm going to my cogs. I do know that story. I'm just going to let my cogs catch up while I do that. But that's why we don't invite you to the MP's dinner, Robert.
I'm not
we had Quentin Wilson.
Very diplomatic.
I was there. We were pretty diplomatic.
Yeah. I can be diplomatic.
No, I know you can. I know you can. But we don't want to put you in a position where you're uncomfortable. But no, I mean, from our perspective, stop burning stuff has been something we launched just under a year ago.
Just under a year, yeah.
And we'd like to be able to do more with it. I mean, the reality is we are, David with a tiny little catapult facing the Goliath.
Yes.
Multiple Goliaths, and that's the reality. So we're very grateful to the people who contribute to stop burning stuff via Patreon. It allows us to tackle some misinformation, but there is so much. there is so much out there, it's almost impossible to do that. I think we have made some progress. We're now starting to talk to corporate organisations about potentially chipping in some money to that campaign. Quentin has been absolutely phenomenal.
Incredible.
In taking the fight on programmes with Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg and talking to politicians and really, calmly putting across the benefits of electric vehicles and sort of slaying the myths one by one. But the story, what newspaper was it in?
The Daily Mail reported that their headline was "Electric Cars Causing All the Potholes in the UK," and they've actually had to say, we made that story up, and they had to publish it as a retraction. They admitted that they made the story up, which was, I think, really quite remarkable.
Yeah, I think it's coming back to me now, but I think the story, the article actually said heavier cars are causing more potholes,
which is pretty obvious.
But then the Daily Mail transcribed that into electric cars are causing more potholes, and that actually came up last night, with the politicians roundtable that we were at. And we were very, very clear. Look, no one's really said anything about automotive obesity, which is a great phrase. Cars have got much, much bigger.
So much bigger.
Car companies have poured money into SUVs and to the marketing of SUVs over the last sort of 15, 20 years. If you look at the growth of the SUV market, it is
huge.
Absolutely extraordinary. No one said anything about that. And also there are lots of commercial vehicles on the road as well, which are very, very sizable. So I don't want to be a Range Rover basher, but to pick one car out, I mean, they're not small vehicles, are they?
And they're not light.
So to sort of point the finger at electric vehicles for things like potholes is clearly disingenuous.
Yeah.
And quite often, where are potholes? There are quite often on the slow roads, right?
Yes,
the
roads, here we've got loads of them.
The roads that are not actually, they don't have the kind of high grade asphalt. I know very little about roads, but I know the grading between the way they make roads on motorways and A roads is very different to B roads, for example. And if electric cars cause potholes, you'd see them at traffic lights.
Yes,
where some of us accelerate too quickly off at traffic lights.
I
don't either, but Jack. So the reality is that it's really, really interesting. So correcting those myths is really, really important. Talking politicians, trying to get the media to report sensibly, and there are some brilliant journalists out there as well. A guy we work with called Ben Kilby, who works with Quentin, has been very, very good at speaking to journalists who will listen and journalists who are keen to learn about the benefits of electric vehicles. So for us, that's been a good campaign, and hopefully much more to come. But it is an incredibly difficult task.
Yeah, no, it is. And we as Dan said, we really want to thank all the people who support that on Patreon, because it's. I mean, if you just Google "stop burning stuff," you'll find the page, and it's been a really interesting experience, because when we first started it nearly a year ago, it was just we were like throwing matchsticks at a tank. It was absolutely hopeless, but we've actually started to have an impact. We've actually started to get newspapers, for instance, to retract stories or to admit stories were incorrect. So it's a few times, and I think the general, I would say that there is a little bit more thought behind the throwaway phrase that would be used on a radio or TV news program. I mean, I think there's a little bit more care. I think they're aware that there might be because they will receive probably 200-300 PR reports a day from the fossil fuel industry in one form or another, from lobbying groups connected with that will be spreading stories about crushing car parks catch fire, all electric cars catch fire. The one about the hospital, that's a really interesting story. There was a guy who was back. He was told when he arrived at a children's hospital, Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool, that he couldn't park his electric car there. That's the story that got out. What he was told is he can't park his electric car in the one car park that's literally underneath the wards where the children are. And then you go, well, he shouldn't be. So my argument is, don't let any cars park there, because we know that the petrol and diesel cars are much more likely to burst into flames. You do not want burning cars underneath a children's ward in a hospital. There's a multi-storey car park next door with 14 electric car chargers in. So they are encouraging people to come to the hospital in electric cars because you can charge them there. But the story that gets out is still electric cars catch fire under children's hospital. Anyway.
Well, the danger has been the sort of vicious circle, the feedback loop that's created. So if I could do one thing to change this, I would try and, pour cold water on the media,
Yeah.
particularly those that don't know what they're talking about. They want more clicks, so therefore they're some of that media is dying. They're getting less views. So actually, electric vehicles is one of the things they can guarantee they're going to get a lot of clicks for that. So that's where they've got to. But sadly, politicians, local councillors,
fire departments
all read and buy into that. And we're all busy people. We don't have time to interrogate information. Sometimes if you hear that electric car is more dangerous for whatever reason, you might take that at face value. But I would advise people, if they're reading the media, to almost see that actually it's more likely to not be true what's being said. So we were in a room with politicians, and they were repeating back to us a whole range of these myths, effectively, that they have heard. And they were a very bright group of MPs. They clearly had done a lot of their own research. So that was interesting. They were nobody's fools, I would say, but they were repeating back what their constituents had said to them again, which had been coming out from the media. So it's that vicious cycle that really worries me. And for example, when I was telling them, well, actually, look, current battery chemistries are 19 times less likely to catch fire than a combustion engine vehicle. Some of them kind of knew roughly that was the case. But when I said to them, look, LFP batteries, which are over half of Tesla batteries now, are LFP batteries, and I explained that are orders of magnitude less likely to catch fire than current set of batteries.
Right.
They were kind of, well, we didn't know that. And I said, well, that's the difficulty of being a politician. You're a generalist, aren't you? You just
by nature,
you wouldn't necessarily know. So unfortunately, bad actors and media take advantage of people's gullibility and lack of ability to stay current. So we're trying our absolute best, and hopefully we'll be able to do more over time, because I think it definitely has in the UK. I think it's had an impact on sales.
Oh, I'm sure it has. And it's had an impact on, even in people looking at second-hand electric cars, which are now much more available. And I think it's very much to do with the psychology of new technology and of fear and of like, oh, is it going to work? And although it's such an easy thing to say, oh, well, you'll get range anxiety and the batteries only last 2 years, you'll have to throw them away. And then you tell people who know nothing about it, go, oh my God, I'm not getting one of those because my old diesel's been going for thousands of years.
Well, you filmed that Tesla in Australia that had done 420,000 miles before it battery changed.
666,000 kilometres. Wasn't it? Yeah, but 400,000 miles,
And, the reality is with all of these stories, you do need to research it. We know a fair bit about it, I think, and it's great to be able to kind of put the counterpoint. But again, at last night's table, we were talking about the used market. I think the used market is something like 80% of car sales are actually used. So I am a bit guilty sometimes of what's the new percentage each month. But the reality is that the used market is huge. The used market is booming. EV sales in the used market are flying.
Way up.
And that's because some early adopters bought cars, fleets bought cars, and now those are going back into the used market. So I actually started Googling, I was thinking, well, maybe I'll get this electric car.
It's a really good time to buy an electric car.
And actually used electric cars, some really good ones on the market for really quite reasonable amounts. So we're getting there, but certainly the new car market has struggled in general terms, and then the EV share has kind of plateaued. And some of it is being driven by fleet, but not all, because if you've bought something privately via Salsac or something like that, you've actually probably tried to buy it as an ordinary punter, but you've had to go through, a lot of leasing or you've had to go through a sort of commercial or company car route because that is better incentivized. So the SMMT figures spoke about 1 in 6 cars only being private as electric in the last round, but actually that's a bit misleading. Then I'm not saying the SMMT are misleading. I'm just saying actually if you look beneath the skin, there's lots of private buying going on, but it's through things like leasing and other things. So it's a murky world at the moment. Anything about electric vehicles and clean energy in the UK. But having been to Australia and Canada, we know that there's much less misinformation out there.
Yes.
And then we're just dreading what's to come from America later this year.
But I mean, I think that's my argument is you've got to see the kind of globe. You've got to pull back and look at the whole globe to see what's really going on. And that is there's an energy transition that is happening now. It's still in its early stages, but it's not going to stop because of one newspaper headline saying no one likes EVs or whatever. It's incredibly irrelevant. I mean, it just is. There's so much else going on. And there's so much, there's so much coming down the pipeline, which is cheaper, longer lasting, more reliable batteries, better charging, faster charging times, all the things that have been, you could say, stumbling blocks in the last 10 years are all being wiped out.
Well, there's more and more technological progress. We think bidirectional charging will be a huge boon to electric vehicles once people realise that unused asset can be used and you can actually maybe make money out of it. So, no, we would say with everything that we do with Fully Charged Show, everything we do with Everything Electric Show, everything we do with Everything Electric exhibitions around the world, Stop Burning stuff, it really is about, as you say, pulling back and looking at the big picture. Yeah. It's very easy to take a couple of little pixels and blow them out of proportion. But actually, if you step back, you realise we are on the right path, and there are always going to be ups and downs and peaks and troughs in this journey. It was never going to be simple.
Well, also, there's always going to be, because that's the thing I thought the other day is that, you know, we sort of see all these electric cars, and because it's still new technology, we're still, and I don't think it's even wrong that we are, but we're still kind of impressed that they work. You get in a new electric car you've never been in before, and you go, oh, it goes, it's good. Basically, in 10 years' time, there's going to be rubbish electric cars, just like there were rubbish petrol cars, and there'll be really good electric cars, just like there were really good petrol cars. You know, they're not all perfect, but they are, you know, I think we haven't reached that point yet where we can say, look, the blah, blah, blah make is just awful, like you could do with petrol.
Well, I think the biggest thing you're going to see now is the consolidation piece.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, you know, if you look at car companies' forecasts, you had Jim Farley on the podcast about a year ago, and Ford at that point were gung-ho, they were bullish,
Absolutely.
You know, we're going pure electric. They are now making some noises to the contrary because the market to them has softened a little bit. But that might just be that they're going back to a customer base that isn't quite ready for electric.
Yeah.
Other companies are flying, but now there's also the Chinese entrance, the Asian entrance. Suddenly, that game of musical chairs that we've talked about often is getting really quite tense. And obviously, these companies build forecasts and they build their whole financials around hitting a certain level of cars sold. And when that doesn't happen, you see them changing their tune. So some are more bullish than ever, BYD, for example, and others are almost like walking back some of their commitments. I noticed with huge interest this week that it was a story from last week. I think it was the Future of the Car event that the Financial Times ran. I think Imogen was on stage there.
Very involved.
I believe that Matti Rimac, the EV hypercar wunderkind, the guy who's often compared to Elon Musk, has talked about them maybe making combustion engine vehicles as well.
Oh, right.
And they were absolutely the kind of poster child for creating electric hypercars. But as I understand it, the premium electric market is probably not quite as big because there's been so many entrants, so much competition. And of course, what does any business do? You can't really blame Rimac. They think, well, we need to survive. Maybe we need to produce other types of cars to do that. But the tensions under the surface of the automotive market are
extraordinary.
The tomato market.
The tomato market
is pretty controversial right now. But the automotive market is just, it's extraordinary. And I, for one, are glad that we don't work for an automotive company just because it's so, I have huge
difficult.
Sympathy for all of them. It's an incredibly difficult time to navigate through.
But I mean, I think it's fair to say, we don't need to mention any marks or brands, but we are getting so many invitations to go and see so many new cars coming out. I mean, it's gone bonkers. We literally can't do them all. There's just no way we can cover all of them. There's so much stuff happening. I mean, I have to keep combing through my emails going, are we doing that? Oh God, what are we doing? And we're all talking to each other all the time to try and work out which ones we can do. There's a lot going on, I think, is the gist of what I'm trying to say.
It's exhausting.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we've covered quite a lot of ground, but I mean, please do come along to Harrogate if you're in the north of the country, the narrow northern bit that Dan was talking about. It's really narrow. It's only 2 feet.
But you can come from anywhere.
You can come from anywhere.
Stuff there and people do. Seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. We would love to do an event in Scotland. It's just not practical for us at the moment. So if you're in Scotland and you kind of quite like Fully Charged Show and you're quite like Robert, please come. Please don't take Umbrage. We'd love you to have you there. Wherever you are. I mean, it's going to be a great show.
It looks like it's going to be a really good show. Yeah, no, we're looking forward to it. So that's all. Please do a bit of subscribing if it takes your fancy. There's a lot of amazing episodes coming up on the podcast. Tell your friends about it. That's always very useful. If they want a little bit of the other side of the story, possibly, if they've been telling you that you have to throw a battery away after 3 years, it's always worth pointing them in our direction. And as always, if you have been, Thank you for listening and watching.